Will you pray with me? Holy and gracious God, we come before you now, seeking your word and your voice. Speak to us. Use these humble words. Speak to every heart the message you would share this morning. We pray in your Son's name. Amen. I have talked before about my experiences in what was essentially a Christian musical theater camp when I was in high school. For many reasons, it was a transformative and long-remembered event. What I haven't spoken about is that 2 of the 3 shows I was involved in, 2 as a performer and 1 as a staff support member, were about saints. The very first show at this camp was a show called Troubadour. It was a very unmemorable show about St. Francis and St. Clare of Assisi. I remember very little of the show and none of its songs. And I was in that show. I memorized those songs, and they're long since out of my brain. But I remember learning about St. Francis and being impressed by his story and the story of Clare, who was his friend and not quite co-partner in the work in Assisi. Similarly, the third show was one I was a part of as a staff person, and perhaps because I was a staff person and not a person on stage learning the songs, I don't remember any of those songs either. But it gave me a whole different look into the life and the tragedy of St. Joan of Arc. The stories of these saints have stayed with me long after these shows have faded in the background, because these men and women were ones who lived what they believed and were willing to pay even pretty staggering costs to do so. I mention them because today is All Saints' Day. It's a liturgical holiday that we don't celebrate in this congregation all that much. Or at least, we didn't last year, and no one came and told me that I missed a major holiday that we should have celebrated, so I'm thinking probably it's not a usual thing. But I could be wrong. Feel free to correct me after worship and say, we usually do, Pastor Joey. By all means. In other places, this day, or the Sunday after it, holds more importance. The Roman Catholic Church uses All Saints' Day as a day to honor the entire pantheon of saints. And other Protestant congregations, including many in the UCC, use this day as a day to remember those who died in the year that was past. That we do in January, so we do something similar, just a different date. This morning, we're not doing either one of those 2 things. So why bring this up? Well, for one, unlike in most years, where we simply would be celebrating All Saints' Day on the Sunday following it, this morning is All Saints' Day. It's November 1st, the day after Halloween. All Hallows' Eve is actually the eve for All Hallows' Day, which is this day. And it felt appropriate on All Saints' Day itself to give the day some space. The other reason is this. I believe that we are all called to be saints of God. And I want to take a moment in this sermon to mention that call and define what I think it means. It's this passage of Revelation that reminds us of our call to sainthood. At this point in this overly symbolic book, the action is sort of paused to describe 2 groups of people. The first, in the text we didn't read, a couple verses before our reading this morning, the writer describes 144,000 people of Israel, a remnant of the people of God, an even amount of all 12 tribes. Very defined amount of people who are the remnant. And then there's the second group, the one we read about this morning. That's a multitude, an undefined number, a mass, too hard, too big to be counted. There's no reason to think that the writer, or certainly anybody since, had looked at this text and really thought these texts meant to imply that one group is better than the other, although it has been used incorrectly against the Jewish people for 2,000 years or so. But it's still striking. Striking to see the difference. of the very defined group of people, and then the mass, too numerous to be counted, described as a mass from all nations. I imagine you might see in it people of all ages, tongues, and races. We would see men and women, youth and children, perhaps from the east and the west, from the north and the south. We would, in short, see a massive group of the people of God. And it's very undefined, unlike that 144,000. What to make of this? I think only one thing, that this is a vision for the church was already becoming in the time of John of Patmos. A church that went beyond what it once was. A church that would become more and more a gathering and a congregation of all peoples from all around the world. The church began as a group of Jews. Jesus, those first disciples, all the first followers of Jesus, Mary Magdalene and more, were all Jewish people. That's the 144,000. But by the time of John of Patmos, and certainly by today, it was a different kind of church. A mass of all peoples around the world. I believe that's what John of Patmos' vision was saying in this part, that the church was expanding. And that second group, in case you've missed it so far, is us. Unless you're Jewish, and I had a Jewish member in my last call, so that's not implying no one can be here. Unless you're Jewish, you are a Gentile, and the second group, and I qualify there, are the Gentiles, people of the world. The vision of the expanding church that John of Patmos would call for. And this multitude, this group, are saints. They are saints singing praise to God, the division of what and whom we're called to be, and they expand all peoples and all the world. They are the saints of God, friends. We are called to be that group, to be saints of God. So what does it look like? How do you become a saint of God? Well, Jesus gives us a clue in Matthew 5. The Beatitudes are an amazing and popular text, one that most of us in the church either know or at least have heard more than once. They're in the lectionary every single year in all three Gospels. No, that Mark. In 2 of the 3 Gospels. And what they speak of is a way of being that goes against our culture, that goes against what society might argue for us. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who are willing to mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. These are descriptions of what it means to be saints for God. To be a saint for God is to strive for a world that God desires. That is to mourn with each other and to mourn for the ways that have not yet reached the kingdom. It is to see the hungry and declare that they are blessed by God, then to do our best to be blessings to them and fill their hunger, and then to join with them and so many others in hungering and thirsting for the kingdom that is to come. Hungering and thirsting for the day when sharing by all will mean scarcity for none. The day when the least of these will be truly cared for. The day when justice will flow down like an ever-flowing stream. To be a saint of God is to be a peacemaker, both in how we imagine our national and international policies and advocate for them, and how we work for peace among ourselves and our own lives, and our own families and workplaces and schools. No saint can do all of these things. Francis, for instance, was pretty good about the poor, but didn't do a lot of international relations, as you might imagine from a mid-century poor saint. But the words of Jesus in the Beatitudes give us an outline, a place to begin as we strive to live into our call of sainthood. The lives of those around us give us another. All of us, I suspect, have our own saints of the church that we would follow, people whose example we have seen or experienced, people in whom we have felt the love and grace of God. Some are public figures, People who call us as a society to be our best selves. People like, for instance, Martin Luther King Jr. or Jimmy Carter. Now please note, I was not even alive for his presidency, and I have zero comment about Carter as a politician. But he had several decades of working for Habitat for Humanity, and that to me seems like something worth emulating, if nothing else. Some of these will be saints, people we've lost in the recent past. People like Carol Maple, or on this Communion Sunday, Irvin Flackey, whose ministry of bringing communion to people and our shut-ins for so many years is one of the first stories I heard about him, and one that will stick with me for a long time. And then we have living saints, people in this congregation and beyond who inspire us each and every day. Now here, I don't want to name names because there are so many of y'all, I don't want to leave anybody out. But you should know who you are, and if you don't, here's a list of some of the examples of what this looks like. People who make and keep our music or keep grand choral traditions afloat. People who tend to our property and our heating and AC. People who come and make our garden spaces beautiful, or rake leaves and trim the bushes or do painting. People who help to make meals in non-COVID times, or teach our young people, or tend to our altars. And so on, and so on, and so on. Each of these moments, each of these ministries are places where we can see the sainthood of all believers shining through. Most of you here do one or more of these things because you are the saints of God. You inspire us all, and you inspire me as your pastor, and for those ministries and moments of sainthood, I thank you. You are the saints of God. And big moments and small moments can be inspiring. Let me tell you a story about one of those small moments. Now, I don't know how true this story is. It comes from a song, but it's a song by Brian Sergio, and usually his stories and songs come from real life, so take it from what you will. It's about a man named Dan. Now, Dan was a member of a church, and he didn't know what he could do to teach. He wasn't a teacher. He really couldn't teach kids. He wasn't a preacher, and he didn't have artistic skills, but what he had was a smile. So what Dan did for decades was every Sunday, when the kids of that church would get up from their worship to leave to Sunday school, they had Sunday school during church at this church. I don't really advocate for that, but when those kids would get up to go to Sunday school, Dan would get up too. And he would stand at the door so that all of the kids on their way to Sunday school would see Dan's greeting and see Dan's smile and know that they were loved. One day Dan died, and the grief that poured out from all of those kids that he touched through decades and decades of just smiling was inspirational. And the church even put up a sign in honor of Dan and his ministry. Dan, a living saint, who did a small thing, but a powerful thing. Dan, a saint of God. Friends, I have learned through the years to appreciate some of those famous saints of God, Peter, Paul, John, Francis, Clare, Joan. But the more I'm in ministry, the more I come to also appreciate the living saints, the recent saints, the ones like all of us who keep this thing we call church going. So on this All Saints' Day, let us recommit ourselves to being saints for God. Saints who share love and care for others. Let us celebrate the saints who have gone before and say with them that we mean to be one too. Amen.